They had planned this. I could see it the moment I walked into the living room. David sitting at the center of the couch, Susan beside him, Thomas in the armchair near the window, hands in his lap, not quite looking at me. Karen standing in the kitchen doorway, not seated with the family, but present, watching. The Christmas tree was lit, gifts still under it, unopened. Nobody said Merry Christmas. "Dad," David said, "sit down. We need to talk about something." I sat in my chair, the one I had sat in for 47 years, the one Margaret used to say was more Robert than Robert. I folded my hands, and I listened. Robert and Margaret Patterson had bought this house in 1978. I was 24 years old. She was 23. We had saved for 6 years on 2 incomes and a level of discipline that our children, raised in comfort, would never fully understand. The house was not large, 3 bedrooms, a garden Margaret had planted herself, a fireplace she had insisted on even though the realtor told us it was impractical. "Fireplaces are not impractical," she had said. "They are necessary." We raised 3 children in those rooms, David, Susan, Thomas. I had watched them grow up in this house the way you watch something you built, with a particular pride that is also a kind of love. I thought they felt the same. The first sign came at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. Karen had mentioned, casually, between the turkey and the pie, that property values in our neighborhood had increased significantly. She had been looking at comparable sales. "Just curious," she said. "Just interesting." I had noted it. Margaret was not alive to note it with me. She had passed in 2016 after 18 months of illness. But I had thought of her that evening, of something she had said to me in 2012 when our neighbor Gerald Hoffman had been pressured by his adult children into selling the house he had lived in for 30 years. "Robert," she had said, watching the moving truck from our front window, "promise me something. If anything ever happens to me, protect the house. Not for us, for the children we want to become, for whoever comes after." At the time, I had thought she was being overly cautious. She was not being overly cautious. She was being Margaret. In 2015, she sat down with James Whitfield and created an irrevocable family trust. The house was legally transferred into the trust that same year. It no longer existed in my personal name. Robert Patterson was named lifetime trustee. The beneficiaries, specified clearly, irrevocably, were our grandchildren, not our children. She wrote a letter, sealed it in an envelope, placed it on the mantelpiece above the fireplace she had insisted on. "Don't open it," she told me. "Not until you need it." I had not opened it in 11 years. David had numbers. He had actually researched the property value. The house was currently worth $1.4 million. Maintenance costs roughly $28,000 annually. Property taxes had increased 3 times in 6 years. "Dad, you're 72, he said, living alone in a 4-bedroom house. The practical reality is that this asset is sitting idle. That money could fund your retirement completely. A smaller place, something modern, easier to manage, makes more sense at your stage of life." He had a brochure, a retirement community 40 minutes away. He set it on the coffee table. "We've looked at some options." I looked at the brochure. Then I looked at Karen in the kitchen doorway. She had been the one to find it, I was certain. The research, the comparable sales, the retirement community. David was presenting it. David had convinced himself it was practical, which was perhaps the most accurate thing about him, but Karen had built the argument he was now delivering. I looked at Susan. She was looking at the brochure. I looked at Thomas. He was looking at his hands. 3 weeks earlier, I would later learn, Thomas had told David he wasn't sure this was right. David had told him it was the practical decision and that he was overthinking it. Thomas had gone quiet. I looked at each of my children. Then I stood up. "Give me a moment," I said. I walked to the fireplace. It had been there for 11 years. A plain white envelope. Margaret's handwriting on the front. "For Robert, when it's time." I had dusted around it, moved it carefully when the mantelpiece was cleaned. Never opened it. Never considered opening it. Until this morning. I took it down, held it for a moment. The weight of 11 years, the weight of a woman who had seen this morning coming before I had believed it was possible. I carried it back to my chair, sat down, opened it carefully. Inside were 3 things: a 1-page document, James Whitfield's letterhead, Irrevocable Family Trust, Patterson Residence, dated 2015. Robert Patterson, lifetime trustee. Beneficiaries, the grandchildren, named individually. A clause in clear language: the property could not be sold, transferred, or encumbered without trustee approval. The children had no legal standing to compel a sale. None. A photograph: Robert and Margaret on the front porch, 1978. Moving day. She was laughing at something I had said. I was 24 years old and had no idea what was coming and looked completely happy about it. And a letter. 1 page. Margaret's handwriting. I read it privately. I will share only one line from it. The line that made me set the page down and look at the ceiling for a long moment before I could continue. "If you're reading this, Robert, it means someone tried. I'm sorry you had to use it, but I'm glad I could still protect you." I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, then I placed the trust document on the coffee table in front of my children. Said nothing. David picked it up. Karen crossed from the kitchen doorway to read over his shoulder. I watched her face move through the first paragraph. David read in silence. Susan leaned to see. Thomas did not lean. He sat in his chair and looked at the document from where he was and did not reach for it. The room was completely quiet. David set the document down. He looked at me. "Dad." "The house was transferred into that trust 11 years ago," I said quietly. "It has not been in my personal name since 2015. James Whitfield's number is on the letterhead." Another silence. Susan was the first to speak. Not to argue, not to defend David. She said, "Dad, I didn't know Mom had done this." A pause. "I should have said no when David called." Nobody responded to that. Thomas stood up from his chair, walked to the window, stood there with his back to the room. Karen had stepped back from the couch. She did not say anything. She would not say anything for a very long time. I drove to the cemetery that afternoon, not because I needed to tell Margaret what had happened. She already knew, had known for 11 years, had prepared for it with the same patient thoroughness she had brought to everything. I went because I wanted to sit near her for a while. It was Christmas. The cemetery was quiet, cold, the kind of still that a person can either find peaceful or unbearable depending on what they carry in. I found it peaceful. Over the following weeks, my phone recorded 53 missed calls, 19 from David. His tone moved through the calls the way grief moves through a person. First resistance, then argument, then something quieter and less certain. 11 from Karen, Transactional mostly. Legal language. Discussions about the trust's validity, about James's credentials, about possible next steps. She stopped calling after James sent a formal letter on my behalf. 23 from David's lawyer. James handled every one. Thomas came to the house 2 weeks after Christmas. He sat in the kitchen. I made coffee. I told him it wasn't right, he said. He didn't listen. I know, I said. I should have pushed harder. Yes, I said, you should have. We sat quietly for a while. Is there anything I can do? I looked at my youngest son, 42 years old, his mother's eyes. Come at Christmas next year, I said. Bring the grandchildren. That's what this house is for. He nodded slowly. Susan called 3 days later. We spoke for an hour. Some things were said that needed saying. Some things were left for another conversation, another time. That is how repair works, slowly, imperfectly. David did not call again after his lawyer became involved. Whether that changes, whether next Christmas looks different from this one, I cannot say yet. Some things cannot be known until they happen. What I know is this. In 1978, a young woman stood on a front porch and laughed at something her husband said on moving day and had no idea she was building something that would last long past her own life. She built it anyway. The house is still standing. The fireplace still works. The envelope is empty now, but what it contained is permanent. Rest easy, Margaret. You thought of everything. You always did. Was this revenge perfectly justified? Or should the storm have raged harder? Drop your verdict below. I read every single one. Hit like if you crave justice and share this story with someone who needs its fire. Subscribe to Lauren's story because here, betrayals don't sleep. They hunt their owners. Every shadow hides a reckoning. Every mask breaks. And every betrayal is answered. Stay sharp. Stay unbroken. Stay tuned.